May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. Water is life. I saw that on a sign over the water bottle filling station at the Phoenix airport on my recent trip. And being in the middle of the desert, I think the folks in Phoenix know a thing or two about water. As we go through our scriptures today and some fun facts about water and the news, I hope you will agree that water is life and a whole lot more. Did you know that water is the most common substance found on the earth, and it covers about 70% of the earth's surface? It also makes up 70% of our brains and 60% of our bodies. We can live for a month or so without food, but only a week without water. I think it is safe to say that water is life. The biblical folks certainly knew the importance of water. Our gospel story is of the unnamed woman at the well. The talk of living water is for another day. But even just common H2O is important. For God not only comes to us in the ethereal and spiritual realms, God also comes to us in the very physical realm. We know this when we meet Jesus at the well. Now, wells were very important places in the ancient world. The water was from the well of life, but also a symbol of wealth, for it was known that the one who owned the well also owned the surrounding countryside. And there were at least 3 prominent stories of one's betrothed being found at a well: Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Rachel, and Moses and Zipporah. The offer to water the camels was a ton of work, thus showed the character of the women who made this offer. Because of the water in the wells, the next generation was able to go on. In our Exodus reading, the people quarreled with Moses, and thus with God, because they had no water to drink. This situation allowed God to perform a miracle. He had Moses take his staff, strike the rock, and the water poured forth. But notice what else God says. He said, "I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb." God is not leaving us alone in the desert thirsty. God is there with us. He knows we need water. God knows all people need water. And this brings me to another idea about water. It is not only life, or perhaps because it is life, it is also justice. Chris Marshall, in his book, The Little Book of Biblical Justice, writes, quote, "The biblical writers considered justice to be, before all else, a personal quality or virtue of God. Justice belongs to the very being of God. Justice is not something God aspires to. It is the heart of who God is and what God does." Keep this in mind. So how is water justice? Or perhaps the better question, how does it bring out injustice? Consider these facts. 780 million people lack access to an improved water source. Unsafe water kills 200 children every hour. 80% of all illness in the developing world is water-related. In Nairobi, urban poor pay 10 times more for water than in New York. And here at home, 3/4 of all Americans live within 10 miles of polluted water. I could go on, for sadly, there are many more facts like this. So we know that water is life, and yet so many of our brothers and sisters don't have access to clean, life-giving water. And that is not justice. That is not acting in the manner and the heart of God. Another facet of water's injustice: there have been at least 265 recorded incidences of water conflicts from 3000 BC to 2012, and likely more since then. One is highlighted by our very own Bruce Rydell in his book, Kings and Presidents. In the discussion about the Israeli and Syrian peace negotiations hosted by President Clinton in 1999, Rydell notes that the boundary between the nations, whether right at the Sea of Galilee or a bit inland, was one of the major sticking points. The Syrians wanted access to the lake, but the Israeli prime minister was, quote, determined not to let his enemies' toes in the water at all. Disputes over water are ancient and very modern. So what are we to do? How can we get creation's amazing gift of water to be a beacon of God's justice? First, just be mindful of how miraculous water is and don't take it for granted. Did you know that water is the only substance on earth that is found naturally in all three forms, solid, liquid, and gas? And it's one of the few substances that is lighter in its solid form than in its liquid form. Thus, ice floats, and so in bodies of water, it insulates the aquatic life beneath it, making life possible. Yes, it is miraculous. And I really do believe that how we think and feel and act towards something makes a difference. Allow yourself to be an amazement and lead with that. We can then be committed to acting from the position that every person deserves access to clean, life-giving water. We can work to conserve water. There are many ways to do this. Fix the leaky pipes, take shorter showers, flush less often. And these things can be very helpful for our local water sources. But that doesn't really help the sub-Saharan African folks, where 40 billion hours are spent each year collecting water. For the women and girls who do most of this work, it can be a full-time job. And this greatly limits their ability to grow their lives in other ways. There are groups that go to these communities and build wells, so there is clean, safe water close to where people live. We can donate or participate in one of these groups. And perhaps you will have other ideas about how to use water to bring about God's justice. So water is life, water is justice, water is also powerful. If you've seen the news this week, you've been duly reminded of that. Did you know that water can dissolve more substances than any other liquid, including sulfuric acid? Now, water sitting in a glass like this seems pretty demure, but over time, it can literally move mountains. And when it gets paired up with strong winds, it can be devastating in very short order. Hurricane Melissa has been called the storm of the century in Jamaica. With sustained winds of 185 miles per hour, it ties with only 4 other hurricanes as the second strongest in the Atlantic since records have been being kept. Much of Jamaica had 15 to 30 inches of rain, and some areas had up to 40 inches. That's a lot of water. And at that point, water is not so much life as it is hazardous to life. The death toll is over 50 and likely will climb higher as the rescue missions ensue. A woman from the historic coastal town of Black River said, "We watched everything come apart around us. We watched 30-foot waves come in and throw everything into the sea." Again, water has called the question, what can we do? We can pray, and we can donate to help those who have lost everything due to water. And we can work to take care of all of God's creation, so harmony reigns more than the raging storms, so balance can be restored. Yes, water is powerful, and like all powerful things, if it is respected and appreciated and used appropriately, it can do much good. In my Bible, the heading of our second reading from Revelation is called Eden Restored. It starts with a river flowing from the throne of God, and then the leaves from the tree of life, the tree that is nourished by that river, and the tree that harkens back to the original garden. It is those leaves that will be used for the healing of the nations. Justice restored. In closing, I know that you will come into contact with a lot of water this week. A rough estimate is that an average American household will use some 1,900 gallons of water in a week. And that's for food growth and everything, not just what you have in the faucet. So as you come into contact with all that water, I hope you will be in awe, will feel gratitude, and show respect. And let it spark your creativity as to how to make more manifest God's kingdom in the here and now. Amen.
Amen.